The rhythmic clang of Marcus's hammer against steel echoed through the underpass, each strike sending vibrations through the old bridge's bones. September rain had left everything damp and cold, the kind of chill that seeped through work gloves and settled in your joints. He'd been repairing the support beams since dawn, grateful for the overtime even if it meant working alone on a Sunday. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been wind. Through the girders, Marcus paused, hammer suspended mid-swing, straining to listen over the distant traffic above. There it was again, barely audible, a tapping. Deliberate, desperate. "Jake, you hear that?" He called to his co-worker who was welding on the opposite support. Jake lifted his mask, killing the torch. "Hear what?" The tapping came again, weaker this time. Marcus set down his tools and followed the sound deeper into the shadows beneath. The bridge, where even the one morning light couldn't reach. The homeless had been cleared from this area months ago for the construction project. But sometimes they returned, seeking shelter from the rain. What he found wasn't a makeshift camp, but a shipping container, rust-red and padlocked, tucked so far back it was nearly invisible. The kind used for storage on construction sites, except this one didn't belong to their company. Marcus had worked this section for 3 weeks and had never noticed it before. The tapping was coming from inside. "Jesus," Marcus breathed, his heart suddenly racing. He pressed his ear against the cold metal. "Hello, is someone in there?" A muffled sound, definitely human. Female, weak. "Jake, get over here now," Marcus shouted, already examining the heavy padlock. Industrial grade, the kind that would need bolt cutters, and bring the emergency kit. He pounded on the container. "Hold on, we're going to get you out." Jake arrived at a run, took one look at the situation, and sprinted back for tools without asking questions. Marcus kept talking to whoever was inside, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "My name's Marcus. I'm a construction worker. We're going to cut this lock. Just hang on a little longer." The bolt cutters made short work of the padlock. Marcus wrenched open the door, and the smell hit him first. Stale air, fear, and something worse. In the darkness, curled in the corner on a dirty blanket, was a woman. Young, maybe mid-20s, with tangled auburn hair and clothes that might have once been an expensive dress. Her wrists were raw where she'd been tied, though the ropes were gone now. And her eyes, green and glazed with exhaustion, struggled to focus on him. "Water," she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. Jake was already pressing a bottle to her cracked lips while Marcus called 911. She drank slowly, shakily, as if she'd forgotten how. In the growing light from the open door, Marcus could see bruises on her arms, her hollow cheeks, the way she flinched when Jake moved too quickly. "How long?" Marcus asked gently, shrugging off his jacket to wrap around her shoulders. She held up 3 fingers, maybe 4, her hand trembling too much to be sure. "Days," his stomach clenched. "You've been in here for days." She nodded, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. He said no one would find me. The paramedics arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours. Marcus stayed, close as they checked her vitals, started in 4, prepared to move her. When they lifted her onto the stretcher, her hand shot out and grabbed his. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave me alone." Marcus looked at the paramedics, then back at her terrified face. He'd seen fear before, but this was different. This was someone who'd been deliberately broken, left to die in the dark. Without hesitation, he climbed into the ambulance beside her. "What's your name?" he asked as they pulled away from the bridge. "Elena," she managed. "Elena Winters." Marcus held her hand all the way to the hospital, this stranger who'd been thrown away like garbage, locked up and left to die. He thought about who could do such a thing. What kind of monster could trap another human being in a metal box and walk away? But mostly, he thought about the strength it must have taken for her to keep tapping, keep hoping, keep fighting for one more day. As they wheeled her into the emergency room, Elena squeezed his hand one more time. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for hearing me." Marcus waited in the lobby, still wearing his reflective vest and steel-toed boots, cement dust in his hair. He called his boss to explain he wouldn't be finishing his shift. He couldn't say why he stayed, maybe because no one should wake up from that kind of nightmare alone. Maybe because those green eyes haunted him already. All he knew was that Elena Winters had survived something terrible, and somehow he'd been the one to hear her call for help. That had to mean something. It had to. The steady beep of monitors filled the quiet hospital room, a mechanical lullaby that had become oddly comforting over the past 2 days. Marcus shifted in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, his back protesting from too many hours in the same position. He'd gone home only once to shower and change. Returning with a duffel bag as if he were moving in, Elena stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Each time she woke, there was a moment of panic before her eyes found him, and then she'd relax fractionally, as if his presence was an anchor in a storm-tossed sea. "You're still here," she whispered, voice stronger than yesterday, but still carrying that note of disbelief. "Told you I would be." Marcus leaned forward, offering her the cup of iced chips the nurses had left. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck." Elena managed a weak smile, then backed over. Twice, Nurse Patricia bustled in, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficiency that brooked no argument. "Good morning. Sunshine. Time for vitals." She glanced at Marcus with the fond exasperation of someone who'd given up trying to enforce visiting hours. "I suppose you'll be wanting breakfast too, Mr. Construction?" "If it's not too much trouble," Marcus replied, having learned that Patricia's gruff exterior hid a heart of gold. "There's a cafeteria downstairs," Patricia said, but she was already making a note on her clipboard. "Though I suppose you've forgotten where it is after camping out here." As Patricia checked Elena's for and took her temperature, Marcus watched the way Elena's fingers unconsciously worried the hospital blanket. She'd been doing that more as the sedatives wore off, as if her hands needed to confirm she wasn't still trapped. "The detective wants to speak with you today," Patricia said. "Gently, feel up to it." Elena's knuckles went white. Marcus reached over and covered her hand with his, surprised when she immediately turned her palm up to interlace their fingers. "I'll stay," he said. "If you want." She nodded, not trusting her voice. Detective Rivera arrived an hour later, a woman in her 40s with silver threading through her black hair and eyes that had seen too much. She took in Marcus's protective posture, the way Elena seemed to lean toward him despite the physical distance between chair and bed. "Miss Winters, I know this is difficult," Rivera began, voice gentle but professional, "but we need to know what happened." "Take your time." Elena stared at their joined hands for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "His name is Thomas Ashford. We were engaged." Marcus felt her fingers tighten around his. He stroked his thumb across her knuckles, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. "It started small." Elena continued. "He'd get angry if I went out with friends, said I was too trusting, that people would take advantage. I thought he was protective. Then he started monitoring my phone, my emails. When I tried to break it off, she trailed off, lost in the memory." Marcus could feel her trembling. "He said if he couldn't have me, no one could. I tried to leave, pack my things while he was at work, but he came home early. He was so calm. That was the worst part. How calm he was when he forced me into his car." Rivera took notes, her expression carefully neutral. "Can you tell me about the container?" "He drove for hours. I tried to keep track of turns, but..." Elena shook her head. "He had it all planned. The container, the blanket, even bottles of water. Like he'd been preparing. He said he'd come back when I'd learned my lesson, when I was ready to be reasonable. But he didn't come back." Rivera said double quotes, no double quotes, the word came out broken. "I kept thinking he would. The first day, I was sure he'd come. The second day, I realized he was going to let me die there." Patricia returned with a tray, took one look at Elena's face, and set it aside. She busied herself adjusting pillows, her presence a buffer against the weight of Elena's words. "I have enough for now," Rivera said, closing her notebook. "We picked up Thomas Ashford this morning. He's not going to hurt you again." After Rivera left, Elena finally broke down. Not the quiet tears of the past 2 days, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Marcus moved without thinking, perching on the edge of the bed and gathering her carefully into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, fingers clutching his shirt. I was so stupid, she gasped between sobs. I should have seen. Hey, no. Marcus's voice was firm. None of this was your fault. You hear me? Not one bit. He held her while she cried. This woman he'd known for all of 2 days, but who had somehow become essential. When Patricia returned, she took one look and quietly closed the door, giving them privacy. Eventually, Elena's sobs quieted to hiccups. She pulled back slightly, embarrassed. I'm sorry. I got your shirt all, Elena. He waited until she met his eyes. You survived something horrible. You're allowed to cry. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to feel whatever you need to feel. She studied his face as if seeing him clearly for the first time. Why are you being so kind to me? You don't even know me. Marcus considered the question. Why had he stayed? Why did the thought of leaving make his chest tight? Maybe I don't know your favorite color or how you take your coffee, he said slowly. But I know you're strong. I know you didn't give up, even when giving up would have been easier. And I know, he paused, then forged ahead. I know that. When I found you, something in me recognized something in you. Like I was supposed to be there. Elena's eyes filled with fresh tears, but these were different. I'm a mess, Marcus. I don't even know who I am anymore. Then we'll figure it out together. He said simply, if you let me. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, she whispered. Together, outside the window. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, painting the hospital room in soft gold. It felt like a promise, fragile but real, of brighter days ahead. The Sunrise Women's Shelter sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, its Victorian exterior giving no hint of the stories contained within its walls. Elena stood on the sidewalk, a small bag of belongings clutched to her chest, trying to convince her feet to move forward. The hospital had been a cocoon, safe and sterile. This felt too much like the real world, and she wasn't sure she was ready. It's just temporary, Marcus said beside her, his presence as steady as it had been for the past week, until you figure out what comes next. Elena nodded, knowing he was right but unable to shake the feeling that she was being abandoned all over again. It must have shown on her face because Marcus gently touched her elbow. Hey, I'll be here tomorrow, and the day after that. You're not getting rid of me that easily. The shelter coordinator, Grace Chen, met them at the door. She was younger than Elena expected, maybe 35, with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that spoke of someone who'd chosen compassion as a career. You must be Elena, Grace said, not extending her hand, having learned that survivors often needed to control physical contact. Welcome to Sunrise. Let me show you around. The tour was brief but thorough. Communal kitchen, living areas, the small library that doubled as a quiet space. Elena's room was on the second floor, barely larger than the container had been. The comparison made her freeze in the doorway, breath catching. We can find you a different room, Grace said quickly, recognizing the panic. We have one on the third floor with a bigger window. No, Elena forced herself to step inside. No, I need to be okay with small spaces again. Marcus set her bag on the narrow bed. You sure? She wasn't, but she nodded anyway. After he left, with a promise to return tomorrow and a hug that lingered just long enough, Elena sat on the bed and tried not to feel like she was drowning. True to his word, Marcus appeared the next afternoon with a thermos of tea and a worn paperback. Thought you might be tired of hospital coffee, he said, settling into the visitor's chair in the common room. I don't even like tea, Elena admitted, but she wrapped her hands around the warm cup gratefully. Neither do I, Marcus grinned, but the lady at the shop said chamomile was calming, so it became their routine. Every day at 4, after his shift ended, Marcus would appear with some small offering, tea, a book, fresh cookies from a bakery he'd discovered. They'd sit in the common room, sometimes talking, often just existing in the same space while Elena tried to remember how to be a person again. Other residents drifted in and out. There was Beatrice, who'd fled with her 2 children in the middle of the night, Nora, whose husband had broken her arm twice before she finally left, Jasmine, barely 21, who flinched at sudden movements and spoke in whispers. Each woman carried her trauma differently, but they all recognized something in each other, a shared understanding that required no explanation. "Your man seems nice," Beatrice commented one evening, watching through the window as Marcus left. "He's not my—" Elena stopped, realizing she didn't know how to finish that sentence. What was Marcus to her? The man who'd saved her life, her daily visitor, the only person whose presence didn't make her want to curl into a ball, honey. Beatrice said gently, "That man looks at you like you hung the moon. Whatever you want to call him, hold on to that." But holding on was harder than it sounded. Some days Elena could barely hold on to herself. The nightmares came every night, leaving her gasping in the dark, convinced she was back in the container. During the day, unexpected triggers would send her spiraling: the slam of a door, the jingle of keys, even the sound of a lock clicking into place. Marcus witnessed one of these episodes 3 weeks into her stay. Someone in the kitchen had dropped a pot, the metallic clang echoing through the house. Elena found herself pressed into a corner, shaking, unable to breathe. The world had narrowed to that sound, that feeling of metal all around her, closing in. Elena. Marcus's voice cut through the panic. He crouched a safe distance away, hands visible. Movement slow. "You're at Sunrise. You're safe. Can you hear me?" She managed a nod, teeth chattering. "Oh, the room was warm. Good. Can you tell me 5 things you can see?" It was a grounding technique Grace had taught her. Elena forced her eyes to focus. "You, the blue chair, a lamp, the window, your work boots. For things you can touch." She reached out tentatively. "The wall, my jeans, the carpet." Her hand found his, and he let her grip it tightly. "You." By the time they worked through the rest, 3 things she could hear, 2 she could smell, 1 she could taste. The panic had receded, leaving her exhausted but present. "I'm broken," she whispered. "No," Marcus said firmly. "You're healing. There's a difference." That night, alone in her small room, Elena thought about his words. Through her window, she could see the oak tree in the yard, its branches bare with approaching winter. Grace had told her it bloomed magnificently in spring, but right now it looked dead, skeletal against the gray sky. But it wasn't dead. It was waiting, gathering strength for when the world became warm again. Maybe she could do that too. The next day, when Marcus arrived with his usual thermos and a new book, Elena met him with something that almost felt like a smile. "I want to learn how to make tea properly," she announced, "the kind you actually like." His face lit up, and Elena felt something inside her chest, some small, frightened thing, unfurl just a little. It wasn't much, but it was a start. In the kitchen, standing side by side while the kettle boiled, their shoulders brushing occasionally, Elena realized that maybe healing wasn't about becoming who she'd been before. Maybe it was about becoming someone new, someone who could survive the winter and still believe in spring. Marcus handed her a mug, his fingers lingering against hers for just a moment. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white, covering all the broken things until they looked whole again. The courthouse steps seemed impossibly steep, each one a mountain Elena had to climb. November wind cut through her coat. A new one Marcus had helped her pick out, warm and practical. Nothing like the designer pieces Thomas had insisted she wear. She paused halfway up, her breath misting in the cold air. "We can take a minute," Marcus said, his hand steady at her elbow. There's no rush, but there was. Thomas's preliminary hearing was in 20 minutes, and Elena needed to be there. Not to testify, that would come later, but to see him in handcuffs, to prove to herself that he couldn't hurt her anymore. "I'm okay," she lied, then caught herself. One of the things she'd been working on with her therapist was honesty, especially with herself. "No, I'm not okay, but I'm going anyway." Marcus's smile was proud and sad all at once. "That's my girl." The words sent warmth through her chest, though she wasn't ready to examine why. Inside the courthouse, Detective Rivera waited with the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Jeanne Cross, who'd spent an hour preparing Elena for what to expect. They found seats in the back of the courtroom, Marcus on one side, Rivera on the other, creating a buffer between Elena and the rest of the world. When they brought Thomas in, Elena's breath caught. He looked smaller than she remembered, his expensive suit replaced by orange jail clothes, his perfectly styled hair now unkempt. But his eyes, those cold blue eyes that had once made her feel special and then terrified. They were exactly the same. He saw her immediately, his lips curving into that smile she'd once thought charming. Elena's hands clenched in her lap, nails digging into her palms. Marcus covered her fists with one large hand, gently prying her fingers open before she could draw blood. "Breathe," he murmured. "He can't touch you." The charges were red: kidnapping, false imprisonment, assault. The words felt clinical, too, clean for what he'd done. But then Jeanne stood and began outlining the case, and new details emerged that made Elena's blood run cold. "Your Honor, we've discovered that Mr. Ashford's actions were premeditated to an extensive degree. He purchased the shipping container 3 months before the kidnapping. He researched survival times without food, water ratios, and Jeanne paused, consulting her notes. He took out a life insurance policy on Miss Winters 6 months ago, naming himself as beneficiary." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Elena felt the world tilt. "Furthermore," Jeanne continued, "we've learned that Miss Winters recently inherited a substantial sum from her grandmother's estate. Bank records show Mr. Ashford had already spent heavily against expected access to these funds, accumulating significant debts." Marcus's co-worker Jake, who'd come to offer support, whistled low. "He was going to kill you for money." Elena couldn't answer. The truth was worse than she'd imagined. It hadn't been about love twisted into obsession. It had been about money, cold, calculated greed dressed up as romance. "The state requests remand without bail, Your Honor," Jeanne concluded. "Mr. Ashford poses a significant flight risk and danger to the victim," Thomas's lawyer argued. But the judge wasn't swayed. As they led Thomas away, he turned one last time to look at Elena. His mouth moved, forming words she couldn't hear but could read clearly. "This isn't over." Elena was on her feet and out the door before anyone could react. She made it to the bathroom just in time, retching until her stomach was empty and her throat burned. When she finally emerged, Marcus was waiting in the hallway, holding a bottle of water. "Jake's getting the car," he said simply. They drove in silence back to the shelter, but Marcus didn't drop her off. Instead, he parked and turned to face her. "Talk to me," he said. "I was so stupid," Elena whispered. "I thought he loved me. I thought when he isolated me from my friends, when he monitored my every move, it was because he couldn't bear to lose me. But it was just money, my grandmother's money." "You weren't stupid," Marcus said firmly. "You were targeted by a predator who knew exactly what he was doing. He studied you, learned what you needed to hear, and used it against you." Elena looked at him through tears. "How do I trust anyone again? How do I know what's real?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he held out his hand, palm up, letting her choose whether to take it. "You start small, one person at a time, one moment at a time." She stared at his calloused palm, the hands that had cut through a lock to free her, that brought her tea every day, that held hers through panic attacks without asking for anything in return. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. "I need to tell you something," Marcus said. "That first day, when the paramedics were loading you into the ambulance, one of them said I didn't have to come, said family could meet you at the hospital, and I almost stayed behind, almost went back to work. But then I thought about you waking up alone, not knowing if anyone was looking for you, if anyone cared." He squeezed her hand gently. "I couldn't let that happen, and every day since. When I think maybe I'm overstepping, maybe you need space, I remember that moment. I remember thinking that nobody should have to be that alone." Elena felt something crack open inside her chest, not breaking, but breaking free. "I wasn't alone," she whispered. "Even in that container, I could hear the construction work. I knew someone was out there. I just had to make enough noise for them to hear me, and you did." Marcus said, "You saved yourself, Elena. I just opened the door." That night, Elena called her therapist for an emergency session. Then she called the lawyer her grandmother's estate had retained, beginning the process of protecting her inheritance. She called friends she hadn't spoken to in months, the ones Thomas had driven away with his jealousy and manipulation. Each call was difficult. Some friends were hurt, others angry that she'd disappeared. But most were just relieved to hear her voice, to know she was alive. With each conversation, Elena felt a little more like herself. Not the girl who'd fallen for Thomas's lies, but someone new. Someone who'd survived the worst and was still standing. Marcus continued his daily visits, but something had shifted. The careful distance he'd maintained was still there. But now Elena understood it wasn't disinterest, it was respect. He was waiting for her to be ready, to choose, to trust. 3 days after the hearing, Elena made tea for the residents at the shelter, using the technique Marcus had taught her. As she poured careful measures of loose leaves, she thought about small steps and patient hands, about the difference between being saved and saving yourself. When Marcus arrived that afternoon, she met him with 2 cups of perfectly brewed Earl Grey and something that felt almost like hope. "I have another court date next week," she said. "Would you come with me?" "Every single one," he promised, and Elena believed him. 6 months, Elena counted them sometimes, not as time lost, but as distance gained. 6 months since Marcus had heard her desperate tapping beneath the bridge. 6 months since her world had cracked open and begun, slowly, to rebuild itself into something stronger. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Elena stepped back to admire her work. A wall of soft sage green that caught the morning light perfectly. Her own apartment, her own choices, her own life. "That's a beautiful color," Rosa said from the doorway, carrying a box labeled kitchen in Marcus's blocky handwriting. Very calming. Marcus's sister had become an unexpected friend, a woman who spoke her mind and took no nonsense from her. "Brother, he talks about you constantly," Rosa had confided during one of their coffee dates. "Even before, when you were at the shelter. Always Elena said this or Elena did that. I haven't seen him like this about anyone." Now Rosa set the box on the counter and studied Elena with knowing eyes. "He's downstairs having an argument with a bookshelf. Something about the instructions being in Swedish." Elena laughed, the sound still surprising her sometimes with how easy it came now. "I'll go rescue him." She found Marcus in the building's lobby, indeed locked in battle with flat-pack furniture, muttering under his breath about universal design languages. His hair was dusty, his shirt damp with sweat, and he'd never looked more appealing. "Need help?" she offered. He looked up, and his face did that thing it always did when he saw her, lighting up like she was the best part of his day, even after 6 months of daily visits turning into dinners, movies, long walks where they talked about everything and nothing. That look still made her heart skip. "I'm a construction worker," he said with mock indignation. "I can build actual buildings. I should be able to handle furniture with cartoon instructions." "Should and can are different things," Elena teased, kneeling beside him, their shoulders brushed as she pointed out where he'd mixed up to similar-looking pieces. It had been like this for months, comfortable closeness punctuated by moments of awareness, when she'd catch him looking at her or feel the careful way he held himself back. He'd been true to his word, waiting for her to be ready, never pushing, never asking for more than she could give. The problem was, lately Elena wanted to give everything. "There," Marcus said triumphantly as the shelf finally took shape. "See? I just needed the Elena touch." "The Elena touch?" She raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, you know, that way you have of making everything better just by being there." The words hung between them, heavier than he'd intended. Marcus cleared his throat, standing. "Quickly, we should get this upstairs before Marcus." Elena stood too, her hand on his arm. "Wait." Claire chose that moment to burst through the lobby doors, arms full of housewarming gifts. "Elena, sorry I'm late, but I brought wine and those candles you like, and oh." She took in their positions, the charge there between them. "Am I interrupting something?" "No," Marcus said quickly. At the same time Elena said, "Yes." Claire's eyes widened. "Okay, I'm just going to." She gestured vaguely toward the elevators. "Take these upstairs, to your apartment, where I'll be with Rosa, not here." After she fled, Elena and Marcus stood in awkward silence. 6 months of careful friendship, of healing, of rebuilding trust one day at a time. 6 months of falling in love with the man who'd literally saved her life, but never once acted like she owed him anything for it. "I'm ready," Elena said quietly. Marcus blinked. "Ready for what?" "For you to stop being so careful with me. For us to stop pretending this is just friendship." She stepped closer, heart hammering. I know you've been waiting for me to heal, to be whole again. But I realized something in therapy last week. What's that? I'm never going to be who I was before. That Elena is gone. But this Elena, the one who survived, who learned to fight back, who makes really good tea now. She smiled shakily. This Elena is in love with you. Has been for months. And I'm tired of wasting time being afraid. Marcus's control finally cracked. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs gentle against her cheeks. Elena, if you're about to list all the reasons we should wait, she interrupted. I've heard them all from my own brain. I'm done waiting. I've done the work. I've gone to therapy. I've reclaimed my life. The only thing missing is you. I was going to say, Marcus said softly, that I love you too. Have since the day you made me tea for the first time, and told me you were going to learn to like it just because I did. Elena laughed, tears springing to her eyes. That's when I knew for sure. But honestly, it probably started the moment you grabbed my hand in that ambulance and asked me not to leave. And you didn't, Elena whispered. You never left, never will, he promised. Then finally kissed her. It was gentle and sure, tender and claiming all at once. 6 months of patience and possibility culminating in this moment. In a lobby with a half-assembled bookshelf as witness. When they broke apart, Elena was crying and laughing simultaneously. Your sister and my best friend are probably watching from the window, she said. Marcus glanced up, and sure enough, two faces quickly disappeared from view. Wanted to give them something to really talk about. Yes, Elena said, pulling him down. For another kiss. Let's give them everything to talk about. Later, after the furniture was assembled and the boxes unpacked, after Rosa and Claire had left with knowing smiles and not subtle winks, Elena and Marcus stood on her small balcony, watching the sun set over the city. The bridge where it all began was visible in the distance, a dark line against the orange sky. Do you ever think about it? Marcus asked. What would have happened if I hadn't been working that day? Elena leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him against her back. I try not to, but when I do, I remember what my therapist says. I survived because I didn't give up, because I kept making noise. You didn't save me, Marcus. You heard me. There's a difference. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You saved yourself. I just opened the door, Elena finished. I know, but you also stayed. You saw me at my absolute worst and stayed. That's not nothing, that's everything, he corrected. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elena thought about containers and cages, about the prisons people build and the ones they escape. She thought about trust rebuilt one day at a time, about love that was patient and kind and worth waiting for. I love you, she said. The words still new enough to send a thrill through her. I love you too, Marcus replied. Always have, always will. In the distance, a train passed over the bridge, its whistle a lonely sound that once would have triggered panic. Now it was just background noise in a life Elena had claimed as her own. A life with sage green walls and assembled furniture, with friends who'd welcomed her back and a man who'd waited for her to choose him. She turned in Marcus's arms, rising on her toes to kiss him again. She was done being afraid, done letting the past dictate her future. This was her new beginning, and she was ready for all of it. Come on, she said, tugging him toward the door. Let's go inside. I want to show you how I arranged the bookshelf, Marcus laughed, following willingly. Is that what we're calling it now? Elena grinned over her shoulder. Would you prefer I be more direct? I prefer you exactly as you are, he said, catching her hand. Direct, indirect, and everything in between. As the door closed behind them, the city lights twinkled on, each one a small beacon in the darkness. Somewhere, someone might be trapped, might be afraid, might be losing hope. But tonight, in a small apartment with sage green walls, two people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances were proving that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the darkest places. Love, Elena had learned, wasn't about being saved. It was about choosing to save yourself, and then choosing who you wanted beside you for whatever came next. She'd chosen well.